Hello, everyone. This is Sarah Zakaria, Associate Director of Alumni Relations at the University of San Diego. I am excited for today's webinar, Higher Education Marketplace and the USD Position, with USD's Assistant Vice President of Enrollment Management, Stephen Pultz. The Mid-Career Alumni Network is hosting this webinar and is an official affinity group of the USD Alumni Association, dedicated to providing relevant programming and services to alumni who graduated within 11 to 30 years ago. We welcome your feedback and ideas to make this a valuable resource for alumni worldwide. Today's webinar is part of a USD Alumni Association's online professional development webinar series that is posted online at youtube.com/U of San Diego. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Currently, the Assistant Vice President of Enrollment, Stephen Pultz, has been with the University of San Diego since 1999. He oversees the offices of undergraduate and graduate admissions, financial aid, registrar, and one-stop student service center. Prior to his current role, he served as Director of Admissions. Additional responsibilities also include serving on the Retention Steering Committee, Orientation Committee, and the Graduate Enrollment and Retention Committee. He has also been Chair of the Enrollment Management Committee and Vice Chair of the President's Advisory Board on Inclusion and Diversity. Prior to joining USD, Stephen worked for 13 years at American University in Washington, D.C. as a counselor, assistant director, associate director, and director of admissions. He began his admissions career at Fordham University in New York City. He received his bachelor's degree from St. John's University and a master's degree from the Teachers College in New York. He has presented on admissions and enrollment topics at National Association of College Admission Counseling, College Board, American Association of College Registrar and Admission Officers, and the National Association of Graduate Admission Professionals. He is currently the president of the National Catholic College Admissions Association. Welcome, Stephen. We now turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It is great to be here and participating in this event, and thank you to all our alumni who are tuning in and learning more about the higher education marketplace, and in particular, how the University of San Diego is trying to not only survive but thrive in this very competitive marketplace. All of you, I'm sure, have read and heard about how competitive it is to get into college these days. I'm sure you read tons of stories about how much college costs, how much debt students are accumulating. Many of you may still be paying off your student loans, so this certainly is a topic that resonates with all of you. So today what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this marketplace and this incredibly competitive environment that all colleges and universities find themselves in. This is certainly not just unique to the University of San Diego, but as the university grows in stature, as the quality of our students and certainly the quality of our alumni continues to grow and grow, USD is competing for the best and brightest students from all around not only the country, but really all around the world. And so our market position is a really strong one, but we face increased competition for our students. And I'll share a little bit about that with you as well. I'll certainly talk about enrollment trends. University does have a very specific enrollment plan in place that helps guide the work of the admissions and the financial aid office. It helps connect us to a lot of activities that are happening around the campus in terms of retention, expanding our diversity and inclusion, and a number of other initiatives. And I'll help share some of the results of the last several years with you. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the role that you all can play in our efforts as we look to continue to strengthen the Torero name and to grow the Torero family. Our alumni can really play an incredibly large role in that, and I'll share some ideas with you along that. I'll also have some contact information at the end, and if you do have additional questions or would like to help, we would welcome the opportunity to talk with you a little bit more. So with that, let's talk about this marketplace of higher education. And to kind of frame the issue, I started out by sharing a couple of headlines and facts from some of the more prominent higher education publications that we find here on campus. Many faculty, many administrators read both the Inside Higher Education and Chronicle of Higher Education pretty religiously. And interestingly enough, one of the big headlines at the start of the school year last year was that 40% of private colleges did not make their enrollment goals. That was according to Inside Higher Education, a survey that was done among people like me, enrollment managers, directors of admissions, and so forth. What that means is that about 40% of the schools that responded to this survey in some way or other did not meet their enrollment targets. That could be the actual size of the class that they hope to enroll. It could be individual enrollment targets, such as the number or percentage of males or females on their campus. It means they maybe didn't fill certain programs that they have, or it could mean that they didn't meet their revenue goals. Colleges and universities, especially private ones, have revenue goals that they need to meet because we're what's known as tuition dependent. What that means is that the majority of the money and revenue that we get comes from tuition. We don't get a lot of money from the state or the federal government, and so in order to operate, we rely on tuition dollars. And so for private colleges to not make their enrollment goals, especially to not make their revenue goals, it puts them at an incredibly bad situation. That's why when you hear about schools that are laying off people and laying off faculty or administrators where they're doing lots of things to cut costs, it's because of that. And so, again, it illustrates just how difficult this work is for so many institutions to have not made their goals. The Chronicle of Higher Education came out with something not too long ago called the hottest seat on campus, which certainly got my attention and the attention of many of my colleagues because it really underscored a lot of the challenges that are facing enrollment managers, not only at private schools, but at public institutions as well, as they face increasingly smaller funding from their respective states. They are starting to behave, if you will, a little bit more like private schools in that they're becoming a lot more tuition dependent. When you hear about state schools that are recruiting out-of-state students or looking to enroll more international students, it's often with increased revenue in mind. And so the challenges that enrollment managers face, and I'm going to get into some of them here, really create a lot of challenges for people in my position. Now, I'm, of course, blessed to work here at the University of San Diego that has so many advantages over other institutions, but nevertheless, USD is facing some very serious challenges as we compete for the best students in this environment. I'm going to talk today really about three major intersecting challenges that are coming to bear on all of higher education, but I think are hitting the University of San Diego in particular. I'll drill into detail about each of these, but we're going to focus on the economics of higher education. We're going to talk about the demographics that are changing the face of who's graduating from high school and who's coming to college. And I'll also talk a lot about the incredible public scrutiny that colleges and universities are under from politicians and the federal government as well as state governments, but also from the public in general. And we'll talk about each of those. First, let's talk a little bit about the economics of higher education. And all of you who went through the university, you certainly know that it's a significant investment that we ask families to make to enroll here at the University of San Diego. But we often find ourselves about the middle of the private universities that we typically compete with in terms of our tuition. Average tuition at all four-year private universities for the year 2013 was just over $31,000 according to the College Board. Average tuition increases, we all know that tuition goes up every year, averaged just under 4%, 3.7% at four-year private colleges last year. And for the current year, tuition at USD is about $42,000. And again, while that may put us in the middle of the schools that we typically compete with, schools, as you'll see on a couple of slides from now, but schools like the University of Southern California and Stanford and Santa Clara and Loyola Marymount University, schools of that nature, our tuition is still a significant investment for families, especially when you look at that in relation to family income. Some Census Bureau data shows that the median family income in the United States in 2012 was just about $52,000. Big variations when you look at, as the slide indicates here, among different races and ethnicities. But the median family income being $52,000 and with tuition at USD being about $40,000, in 2013, our tuition was 77% of the median family income in the United States. So when we talk to families, and families are searching online and they're looking at afford, what kind of colleges and universities are going to be appropriate for them, cost becomes a huge factor. For many, they don't feel that this is even a realistic option for them. And so we've got to do a lot of extra work through communication and through education to help them understand how financial aid works and how we might be able to make it affordable, even if they don't have necessarily the family resources. But you can see that this model of our tuition versus what families' incomes are is really one that's putting a lot of strain on our ability to enroll students. Of course, with median family incomes being fairly flat and tuition going up, we're seeing an enormous increase in the number of our students who are applying for financial aid. This fall, almost 72% of our admitted students filed a FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, which is the primary way that families will apply for financial assistance. Many of you may remember filling out the FAFSA when you were in college. To show how much this has changed and the financial implications of how this has really altered our enrollment situation here, back in 2007, about less than half, 45% of our entering class filed the FAFSA and were shown to have had demonstrated need based on the analysis that the federal government uses to determine need. About 45% of our entering class. Well, last year in 2014, it was almost 60%. And in fact, for 2015, although we don't know the final numbers yet as the class is still settling in, we expect that to be about 60% of our class that are going to have demonstrated financial need. This has put not only an enormous strain on the resources of the financial aid office in terms of staff processing all those additional applications, the added emails, the added phone calls, the students who come in, but it also puts an enormous strain on the financial resources that we have. Again, being a tuition-dependent institution, and now so many more of our families needing financial assistance, it becomes even more critical that we make our enrollment. In the beginning, Sarah mentioned some of my work on retention efforts here. And a huge part of enrollment management is not only bringing in new students, but hanging on to the ones that we have and helping them persist through to graduate and ultimately, of course, to become successful in whatever career they've chosen. And so a lot of our work focuses on returning students, and that applies financially as well. As you can imagine, the enormous economic downturn of the last several years has affected families in some pretty profound ways, with parents finding themselves laid off or no longer having two incomes in their family. Many of them are struggling with their homes as the value of homes have gone down. All kinds of circumstances that affect our returning students. And the university has channeled a fair amount of resources, financial resources, to help those students so that they can continue to stay here. Again, adding to the strain of our financial picture. And that, of course, leads us to a topic you hear about almost every day. If you read newspapers or watch the news or even listen to the radio, there was a big article and a big story, I should say, on National Public Radio about this topic just a couple of days ago, and that's student debt. Nationally, the undergraduate student debt upon graduation for all 4 years is just a little over $28,000. And you can see at USD, it's not too much more than that. For the group that just graduated, it was just about $30,000 for student debt. So the expectation is that we do expect students to borrow responsibly and reasonably in order to help finance their education here at USD. To have a student debt of about $30,000 given current loan rates would probably mean that a student has a repayment of somewhere around the high 300s or $400 a month in terms of a repayment. The average starting salary for a USD graduate last year was somewhere in the $40,000 to $45,000 range. And so, again, as we think about this equation of, yes, students are going to be asked to borrow to attend school here, it's with the understanding and the expectation that they are going to receive an excellent education. They are going to be able to convert that into a well-paying job, and they're going to be financially well off enough to be able to manage their student debt. But at the same time, as that debt number continues to grow and becomes more and more concerning, we also expect families to pay the lion's share of attending the university as well. And again, as you saw just a little while ago, in light of those family incomes, that's becoming increasingly more difficult to do. So we do expect families to borrow as well. And for the 2014-2015 academic year, when you consider how much parents are expected to borrow, as well as how much students are expected to borrow, a typical family over their 4 years will borrow over $100,000 in order to attend the university. So again, as we think about trying to make this case and trying to talk about the value proposition and trying to help families understand the resources that are available, this becomes more and more difficult, especially in light of the fact that family incomes have remained pretty stagnant over the last couple of years. So let's shift our attention now from the economics that are affecting all of education, especially private education, talk about some of the demographics. Enrollment managers pay a lot of attention to demographics because it gives us a sense of who's coming down the pipeline. We know how many people were born 18 years ago. We certainly know lots of patterns of what attendance is at K through 12 education. And so we have a good sense projected out a number of years of what the college-bound population is going to be looking like. And as you can see here, that the number of public high school graduates actually peaked a number of years ago and is in a state of reasonable decline. And that decline is expected to continue all the way through 2018. This varies in different parts of the countries. And in the next slide, I have a map that will illustrate which parts of the country are particularly being hit by these demographic changes. But all across the United States, almost any place where there's going to be any growth at all in terms of high school graduates, that growth is going to be among Hispanic students. USD faces an additional demographic challenge in that we rely a lot on Catholic students and Catholic high schools to recruit our students. And according to the National Catholic Education Association, an incredible number of K through 12 schools reported closed or consolidated between 2000 and 2012. You can see there almost 24% of all those schools are facing significant enrollment declines and financial difficulties, forcing them to either combine or to close altogether. The number of Catholic school students at these institutions declined by almost 24% as well during that same period. So we're finding that there's fewer and fewer Catholic school students who are out there for us to recruit. In this most recent class that joined us just a couple of weeks ago in 2015, of all of our Catholic students who attended a Catholic high school, only about 70% of them actually indicated that they were Catholic, which again further illustrates that just like colleges are facing a lot of financial and demographic challenges, our K through 12 Catholic schools are as well. And so again, the demographics of these demographic challenges really again make it a lot more difficult for us to manage. This is sort of an illustration that you can see is illustrating the point that I just made. What you can see here is from 2015, 2008, 2009, all the way through the next 10 years, you can see the changes in total high school graduates. And what you're able to see here is that here, especially the darker colors, the blue colors, are where there are going to be declines. All throughout the Northeast, all throughout the upper Midwest, you're going to see huge declines in the number of high school graduates. The areas of orange, states like Utah, Colorado, and Texas, are really some of the only states that are going to be seeing any kind of significant growth at all. And as I mentioned earlier, that growth is almost entirely among Hispanic students. Even in California, and most of the main states that we draw from, you're going to be seeing declines in the number of high school graduates. Again, placing a lot of pressure on all higher education because more schools are competing for fewer students. If you look then at the non-white share of public high school graduates, again, the same time frame projected out across the next number of years, you'll see that there's places where there's going to actually be growth. And again, this is in Hispanic students, as you might imagine, all throughout the Southwest here. Now, the good news is that we draw very heavily, not only from California, but from Nevada, from New Mexico, from Arizona, from Texas. So many of our states are going to see the non-white share of public high school graduates actually increase. But if you overlay the data point that I showed earlier in terms of family income, these students who are graduating from high school, these increases are from families that typically have lower family incomes, that have not typically had a college experience, so these students are the first in their family to go to college. And so it really exacerbates some of those financial challenges that we have. And so we again have to really change our approach to recruiting, our messaging to these families, our messaging about financial aid and the way the process works, and then certainly just fundamentally being able to provide more assistance for these families as a practical matter becomes of paramount importance if we're going to continue to have the success we've had in enrollment. The third converging force that I wanted to talk a little bit about that is really impacting higher education in some pretty significant ways is this notion of public scrutiny of higher education. Again, I'm sure you all read and see the articles and hear the news stories all the time about how much colleges cost, and even the questioning of the value of higher education, and is it really worth the investment that families are expected to make. Of course, we certainly feel that it is, and we hope that you do feel that your education at USD was a worthwhile investment as well. But nevertheless, families are obviously increasingly concerned about student debt. They're concerned about how they're going to manage those payments moving forward. They're concerned a lot about what the payoff is going to be. What kind of jobs are they going to get? What kind of salary are they going to be making? What kind of lifestyle can they expect to have as a result? In fact, this is becoming so much of a challenge that it's really beginning to factor into the major that a student is considering. They're increasingly choosing a major not because it's of their interest or their passion, but it's because they think it's going to create a good paying job for them. And of course, graduation rates. The notion of retention and helping students graduate in a timely manner is critically important, because the longer a student is here, the more costly it's going to be. So it is really incumbent on institutions to do all that they can to help students graduate in a timely manner. When we recruit now and we go out on the road and we're visiting high schools and we're at college fairs, we get as many, if not more, questions about the outcomes of our students than we do about some of the more traditional things we would get about the average GPA and SAT score, or what you need to do to strengthen your application. Families are so focused on the outcomes of this experience. And some of that, I think, can certainly be considered good. We want, if we're asking families to make such a big investment, we want there to be very positive outcomes. But as I said, it's starting to really alter the choice of major, and certainly the choice of the schools that students are considering. And in many cases, narrowing those choices to not include private institutions like the university. Many of you have heard about national efforts to kind of provide more consumer information for families. The President's Scorecard, the National Scorecard, is one of those through the Department of Education, where families can start to get, again, very consumer-driven information about cost, about student debt, about graduation rates, and so forth, and starting salaries of graduates. And so those data elements become critically important. And again, people are really scrutinizing this investment. Net tuition, if you look at what our sticker price is, as I mentioned before, a little over $40,000, and you were to subtract the average financial aid, you'd come up with what's known as the net tuition. And there are many lists from Forbes magazine to Money magazine to any number of them that rate colleges and universities. For a while, USD was in the top 50. We're now out of the top 50, but not by much. And so again, it's another point that makes this very challenging. Families see that, they begin to immediately think that they cannot afford a USD education, and they move on before we've even had a chance to necessarily help them understand that perhaps there is enough financial assistance to make this just as affordable an option as some other schools they may be looking at. But this final bullet point I want to share, I think, really illustrates how much more price sensitive and how much more of a consumer process this has become for families. We survey all of our students every year, those that came and those that didn't come to USD, and we try to get as much information as we can to help feed back into our recruitment strategies for the coming year. And last year, 75% of those first-year students who did come to USD indicated that we were their first choice. That number has been creeping up steadily over the last couple of years, so that's certainly a positive sign. Most of our new students really wanted to be here, and we were their first choice. But what's disturbing, and again, a cause for alarm as we move forward, of those that didn't enroll, that chose another option, they were admitted to USD but chose to enroll somewhere else, almost 40% of them, we were also their first choice. So students are not coming, again, for financial reasons, for consumer reasons, even though we might be their first choice. And when I talk to my colleagues at Santa Clara and Loyola Marymount and many other private institutions, they're seeing very similar numbers. So families are choosing not necessarily their first choice of school, but they're choosing the choice that's going to be most feasible for them from an economic perspective. So I want to frame a little bit about University of San Diego's position in the marketplace. And for some of you, this may be a familiar list as you remember back to maybe some of the schools that you applied to as when you were looking at institutions. But there have been some notable changes. According to that, again, the surveys we do back in 2014, you see some of our traditional West Coast Conference schools there, like Loyola Marymount and Santa Clara. We lose the most students to the University of Southern California, meaning that when students are admitted to both, more students choose and go to the University of Southern California than any other institution. So that's kind of good company to be in terms of the quality of student that we're attracting, but again, makes our jobs all the more harder as we move forward. If you look at the University of California, again, increasingly with cost being a factor, we're seeing more and more of these institutions overlap in terms of where students are applying. UCLA, UCSD, excuse me, Santa Barbara, Irvine, Davis, some of the biggest ones. And then out of state, you can see a lot of national Catholic universities, but also, interestingly enough, in some of those major states that we get students from, the University of Arizona, Washington, and Colorado, we're losing more and more students to the flagship institutions at these, again, often for financial reasons. In particular, among some of our higher quality students who may be getting into these honors programs, we're finding more and more students choosing those less expensive options than choosing the University of San Diego. So again, compounding the challenges that we have. I mentioned earlier that at the university, we do have a very specific and very detailed enrollment plan that we put into place. This is really the second plan that we've had. The first one took us from 2007 to 2012, and then this most recent plan from 2012 through 2015. And I thought it would be helpful just to share with you a little bit about what some of our goals were and how we're faring in terms of achieving those goals. Please note the numbers in the last column there in 2015 are estimates. We won't really know the final tally until sometime in a week or two once our new class all gets settled. But we had goals for maintaining the total undergraduate enrollment. And at the time, you could see it was just shy of 5,500 students. Well, we far exceeded that goal and in fact are quite full. And if you have been to campus and have tried to find a place to park, I'm sure you can see the evidence of that. So from an enrollment perspective, we have actually been in very good shape. We are over what we intended our enrollment to be. And yet we're able to find students still enjoy the small classes. We found housing for all of our students, again, being primarily a residential environment. But we are about as full as we really can be. So at this point, we're not really in a position to grow very much. Talked about retention. We've been very successful at retaining our students. And one measure of that is how many of your first year students come back for their sophomore year. And we have been very consistent with 90% of those students coming back. That's a very good benchmark for an institution to have. We wanted to raise the profile of the entering class with the average GPA and test score. We've made some progress here. We've had some ups and downs, and that has been a struggle for us, although we still, again, attract and in fact enroll students in the very highest quartiles of students across the United States in terms of their average SAT score and certainly their GPA. We have become a much more racially and ethnically diverse campus, as you can see from some of those numbers. We also had enrollment goals for our graduate enrollment. Again, they contribute a lot, not only to the quality of programs and the excellence of our faculty, and I'll go on to do wonderful things, but we also need to make sure that we're managing that graduate enrollment from a revenue perspective as well. And as you can see, we've been moving in a very positive direction. And one of the goals of the university was to become a more international place and to offer our students a more international experience. And we have certainly grown the number of international students in the last couple of years. So the final points I'd like to make are about legacies. Legacies are students who have a family connection during the application stage, whether it was their parents, their siblings, grandparents, and so forth. But it's a really important dimension for us to continue to grow and strengthen the Torero family. And so we have identified a whole series of activities. You see some of them listed on the left there that we utilize during the recruitment process for students once we've identified them as having that important Torero connection, from materials that we send, communications that get sent out, activities that we offer, and so forth. But what you can see in the chart on the right-hand side of your screen there is some of the progress we've made regarding our undergraduate and first-year students. In this most recent class, almost 5% of our applicants came from legacy applications. You can see that we very much factor that into our admissions decisions. The admit rate of our legacy students is significantly higher than our overall admit rate, which this year was just a shade over 50%. And we enrolled about 11% of our first-year students now have that really strong Torero connection. And it's a number that we really hope, again, as you all know, as a relatively young institution, something that many institutions have a leg up on, or certainly a lot more years of work at, as they strengthen that really important connection. So I thought I would share with you a little bit about how we're doing, and again, something that we continue to look at and be very sensitive to. And so finally, I want to just talk a little bit about the role that you can play in helping us meet a lot of these challenges. Again, these economic, demographic, and the public scrutiny challenges that we face require the entire campus to move together in unison and in a very cohesive and collaborative way to make the case for why a student should choose to come here, and to help provide the resources, certainly financial as well as otherwise, for them to be successful here. And so certainly giving is one of those things, but I'm not going to talk specifically about that. There's a lot of other things that you can do to share your experiences, and that's certainly with regard to recruitment. This fall, our admissions team will probably visit several hundred high schools and attend hundreds and hundreds of college fairs around the country, and in fact around the world. We can't possibly cover all that there are to cover. So having graduates, alumni cover these fairs and nights and talk to other prospective students and families is really important. We launched an alumni interview program in 2014. We expanded that last year, and we're continuing to grow that program this year. Great opportunity for alumni. We provide a lot of training. We provide you with a lot of help in that regard, but it's a great way, again, to share your story, to help a new generation of Toreros understand the benefits of being in this very special environment. We want to hear about what you're doing now. So if you haven't already told the Career Center or let alumni know that what you're doing, we need to have as many profiles and as many majors as we can. Again, as families are focusing so much on these outcomes, it's really helpful to have an inventory of successful alumni in all different fields, all across the country, and in fact across the world. And of course, we would love for your help in building and supporting the Torero family as our students go out to look for work. If you're in a position to do some hiring, please connect with our Career Center, to attend our job fair, to have a connection for our graduates to reach out and reach to you to help with their career. Mentoring and, of course, giving, as I said, are some of the ways that alumni can get involved. These are challenging times for higher education in general, and they certainly are challenging times for the University of San Diego. The economic forces that are facing higher education in general are really combining with those demographic numbers that I mentioned to really make this an incredibly competitive and certainly very consumer-driven process. And as we continue to have to prove the value of our education through the public scrutiny and provide the numbers of the successful outcomes that that families are demanding, again, we as a university are pulling together. We have a lot of wonderful plans in place. We are so excited about President Harris and the vision that he's going to bring and the energy he's going to bring to help with this. But as alumni, you have a great role to play. Forward to hearing from you, and my contact information is there. I thank you for your attention, and go Toreros.
Thank you so much, Steve, for a great presentation. I appreciate you sharing your expertise with USD Alumni. I learned a lot about what alumni can do to support the university through volunteering, through congratulatory calling, college fairs, and offering to do alumni interviews, as well as giving to scholarships and building the Torero Network by hiring Toreros. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank the Mid-Career Alumni Network for hosting this webinar. There are many ways to connect to the University of San Diego and the USD Alumni Association through social media. We are on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Flickr, and YouTube. You can also build the Torero Network by volunteering through the USD Alumni Association and attending in-person events in our 23 domestic regional Torero clubs and our 4 international regional clubs. No matter where you are, you're a Torero for life.